where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and delighted to introduce today's guest, Pam Landry, who has 40 years' experience as a radio host and many other talents. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Georgian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I just appreciate it so much for you to be on this side of the camera. You've performed many roles in radio, behind the scenes, on air. Currently, you're on this WOW station that comes out of a Toyota studio, so we'll talk about that. And you're also a personality, alternative music at 107.1 The Peak, and you do voice work. So those are some of the main categories. That is unusual, of course, to have a station in a dealership.
A little bit, yeah.
And how did you and your co-host, Brian Smith, get involved with that?
We call it WOW Radio CT.
Okay.
And you're correct, it is inside Toyota of Wallingford, which is a car dealership on Route 5 here in Wallingford. Brian and I had worked together before years ago. We were on WPLR in New Haven. Steve Zion, who owns Toyota of Wallingford, he redid his dealership, which is an amazing car dealership. It's got playland in it for kids. It's got a video arcade. It's going to have a restaurant. It's going to have a nail salon. It's going to have a beauty parlor, all these things. And Steve has always loved radio and has always advertised his car dealerships on radio.
Okay.
So he said, I have this space in this great dealership. How about a radio station? And he asked Brian and I, because we know him from way back, if we'd like to be involved. And we said, sure.
Okay.
So there we are. It's WOW Radio CT. We're online at wowradioct.com. You can download our app, and the station's on 24/7. Music, which is 70s, 80s, some 60s, some 90s rock. And then Brian and I do shows.
Tell us about the state of the art, radio
The
station.
studio is amazing. It was built by our friend who's an engineer, Ryan Krupa, who is an engineer at ESPN. And Brian and I had worked with him before. And Steve hired him to come in. He designed the studio, which is incredible. Your husband was in there a few weeks ago, Bill. And I tell people, with all the years that I've spent, and Brian says the same thing, in a number of different radio stations, this one is the nicest one I've ever worked in. It's massive. We've had 5-piece bands in there. We had the entire Hamden High School girls basketball team in there.
Okay.
We can fit a lot in there. No expense was spared. We have top-of-the-line equipment. It's a great place, and it's right in Wallingford. Anybody can come by.
Great. Who helped design it? Because most people wouldn't know what would be very satisfying for a host to have.
Well, Ryan, who is the engineer, designed it, and he's worked in radio at a number of different radio stations and in studios. And he, along with Steve, talked about, Brian and I had some input too on what we thought we needed.
Yeah.
And together the plan came together.
And in terms of the shows that you do, I know you sent me some photos. It looks like you've had, in addition to, say, a basketball team, animals, like a goat?
Yes.
Maybe a snake? So tell us some of, I know you do a lot of community, goodwill community events.
Yes.
You mentioned my husband's there, as a veteran.
Vietnam vet, yep.
Yep.
Brian and I do a lot of things. Brian is doing a morning show from 8 to 11.
Okay.
And Steve, the owner of Toyota, joins him a lot of times on that show. Then at 11 o'clock, I come in, and Brian and I do a show from 11 till 3. This is Monday through Friday. And then we rebroadcast that show from 5 till 9. So we're booking all kinds of guests, from community people to chambers of commerce, nonprofits. We've had people from WPAA-TV and a lot of live local bands come in.
Nice.
And there's so much talent musically in Connecticut. So that community has really grown, and it's helped us get the word out about what we're doing as well. And there's nothing better than having live bands in the studio. We are a commercial radio station. If anybody wants to advertise on wowradioct.com. But corporate radio has a lot of rules and regulations that we don't have to deal with because Steve believes in us. He hired us to do a job. We can have a band come and play live for an hour, which is not something you're going to hear from a lot of radio stations these days. It's just not done that way. And yes, we have had farm animals.
Including a baby goat.
Several baby goats.
Okay.
There is an organization in Cheshire that deals with primarily autistic children. And they brought a couple of their therapy goats in. Unfortunately, the goats kind of made a mess
Yeah.
in the studio. So our engineer, the aforementioned Ryan, told us no more farm animals in the studio. But dogs are welcome, cats are welcome.
All right. Housebroken pets are welcome. Yeah, okay.
We're pet friendly.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
To a point.
To a point.
Yes.
Okay. Now, partnering versus solo. Tell me about, pluses and minuses, or just what's different about that.
Pluses to both.
Okay.
The years that I spent in radio, which is, yikes, about 40 now.
Yep.
Yeah. I have always hosted my own show solo, rock radio, until Brian and I got together. And now I have a co-host, which is wonderful because Brian has a wonderful sense of humor, and we can play off of each other, and we get along great. There are people that actually thought we were married.
Okay.
No, I call him my brother from another mother.
Okay. Wouldn't be as much fun probably if you were married.
Probably not.
Right.
But it's great to have somebody to play off of.
Yeah.
And also when you're busy, if somebody comes in the studio, it's nice to have another person that can fill in. Like I can be doing something while he's doing something else.
Okay.
Because sometimes there are distractions.
Yeah.
We have cameras in the studio. Maybe the cameras aren't working. Somebody's got to run and try to fix those. So it's nice to have another person to kind of, lean on to a degree.
Sure.
But mainly as a partner. It's a lot
I
of
was saying,
fun.
It sounds like a wonderful partnership. And it also, in speaking with you, I learned that the radio industry's undergone a lot of changes in the last few decades. And so those deregulation activities, mergers, share how those things have affected the whole business of radio.
I think that's something that's happening in a lot, if not most businesses now. It's been going on for a number of years. I was downsized about 16 years ago from WPLR when the market crashed in 2008, 2009. A lot of companies were laying people off at that point. And consolidation, what we've been seeing over the past number of years is one company will buy up a bunch of radio stations, move them all into one building, and then you have duplicate staff. So somebody's going to have to go.
Right, that's a merger.
You can't have 2 of these. You can't have 3 of these. So a lot of people losing their jobs. And also a lot of the large mergers with the big corporations, they've kind of taken the fun out of what radio used to be.
Yeah, bureaucrats do that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's about entertainment. It's about being friends to the community, friends to people, spreading the word about things, where a lot of the corporate entities want you to play the same 300 songs over and over and over again and don't step out of the bounds and, don't go out of the box. And that's just the way it is. So that's another really nice thing with WOW Radio CT is that we're not doing that. We're allowed to, pretty much the sky's the limit.
Okay. And there is a saying that we become prisoners of our own procedures. So when bureaucracy increases, the procedures get established, and hardly any of them get taken away.
That's absolutely true.
Right?
And in radio years ago, there weren't consultants, there weren't shareholders. And as music director at PLR in the old days, we would just take, for instance, a list of songs. Okay, here's a list of Tom Petty songs. Let's pick which ones we're going to play.
Okay.
Now, everything is researched. And the best testing songs are the ones that get played on the radio. And to your point, Georgian, everybody gets tired of their favorite song if they hear it over and over and over again. Now, it's something called burn. They don't necessarily want to hear that, the higher up. So it's a tightrope. Yeah. Research used to be, I called it a tool, and then suddenly became a Bible.
Okay.
Which is, again, to your point, it should be something that helps you guide your decisions in what you're creating, but not so strict that you can't be creative with it.
Mix it up.
Yep, exactly. Set yourself apart.
Well, and enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah,
because
that too.
Certainly if you have an opportunity, you have a certain affinity for a certain song or like the way it pairs with another. Yeah. out of your hands sometimes. I don't want to pass over when you mentioned to me you do voice work. Explain what that is.
Voiceover work. For instance, I'm doing stuff for WNPR, which is the Hartford public radio.
Okay.
For public radio, basically they don't run commercials per se. They run report comes from. So I'm doing that voiceover work for them.
Okay.
Voiceover for TV, voiceover for radio, if anybody needs. The irony to me is I never liked the sound of my own voice. I never intended to get into radio.
Okay.
I wanted to be a writer. I went to school for writing. I fell into radio, and then I never got out.
Let's talk about how that
It
happened.
sucked me in.
Okay. Maybe it was fate. Let's think that way. Tell us how you got sucked in.
It's been a great ride.
Okay.
You know, I mean, what I said to you before about the old days was not meant as a complaint by any means.
Right.
I loved my job, and I still do. You know, I'm of a certain age now where maybe I'm not supposed to be working so hard.
Well, who makes those rules?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But everything I'm doing, and there's 3 jobs. The WOW radio job is the full-time job. Everything I'm doing is what I know how to do and what I enjoy doing.
Okay.
So I'm really fortunate. And
Absolutely.
radio just kind of happened. I walked into a radio studio one day when I was doing something else, and I thought, that looks like fun. I like all those knobs and those lights and stuff, and maybe I should try that. And I did.
And were you
It
writing at that time? Were you pursuing your writing passion?
I was kind of just out of college. I was living in New York City, and I needed a job to help pay my rent.
Yeah.
And so I started temping.
All
I'd
right.
been working for a computer company, like they called them word processors.
Oh, yeah, I
back
remember
there.
that. Yep.
So if you were good at doing word processing, you could pretty much get a job in any office. So I took those skills, quit my full-time job, which was a sales type job that I despised,
Okay.
and took the skills that I knew and went to a temp agency. And one of the jobs they put me in was at a radio station in New York City.
And so what's the first job that you had? I mean, what was your role?
On the air?
Yeah.
After that off-air job at the radio station as a temp, I went to kind of a Connecticut School of Broadcasting type place that was in the city. It was called Center for the Media Arts. It doesn't exist anymore. It was basically to get a demo tape, which you needed to, and back then it was a physical
Literal
cassette.
tape, yep.
Yes. And you had to have that to get a job. So they taught you the basics about how to do radio. A lot of people aren't successful at it, just like anything else.
Sure.
So you got to find out if you can do it.
Yeah.
And apparently I could do it. I got a job. My first job was a part-time job. So I was living in the city, working full-time at that radio station, off the air. Got my first full-time job on the air, which was an overnight. So I'd work all day on Friday, and then I'd hop on the Metro North train, go up to Westchester, and work the overnight. Because I needed to start somewhere.
Sure. And you were young.
And I was young. I
Ambitious.
was in my late 20s. I got kind of a late start.
Well, but you put in a
And-
lot of time.
That led to
Yeah.
a full-time job,
Sure.
and then I went to another radio station.
Okay.
You know, it just seemed to keep working out. Met my husband in radio,
Okay.
so it's been good. It's been
right.
good to me. Never got rich.
Well, this doesn't
That's
seem like that was
not
maybe your
Not my
ultimate
goal.
thing. So your writing skills, and you got a degree in journalism.
Creative writing.
Okay, creative writing.
In English,
so
yeah.
how did that help you rebound when you lost your job after the market crash?
That's a great question. You know, you always talk to people that say you have to reinvent yourself. You know, when you lose your job, reinvent yourself. Take a look at what you can do well.
Right.
Communications, big field. Okay, what within that can you know, if I'm not going to get a job in radio, what can I do? So I had a friend at the New Haven Register, called her up. I said, you got anything? I can write. Sure, I'll throw you some feature stories. So she gave me some. I went to Patch, which was just starting then,
Okay.
the local regional news networks. And I also did the census. I was
Okay.
a census worker.
Knocking on doors? Literally.
Yes.
Okay.
And the money was good too.
Okay.
At that point, it was the 2010 census. And I was like, hey, I need
All
a
right.
job.
Right.
So
And you need to talk to people.
need to talk
You
to
need to be able
people.
to connect a little bit
Yep.
to be, establish some kind of a rapport to get the information you need.
And all of that, during all that time, I stayed part-time at a couple of radio stations.
Okay.
And then, you keep looking for what you really want.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, hopefully, something opens up, and it did.
Great. So that gives people encouragement that might be listening. Their moms might be listening and say, heard this
Think
woman.
about your
Yes,
skills.
think about your skills. Take an inventory. What do you do well? What comes usually kind of naturally a little bit. Even if you're not that aware of it, you, as you say, are able to do some things that other people can't do. Maybe no one would necessarily be able to understand exactly why, but there's a whole magic mix of
And don't
our
underestimate
traits.
yourself.
Right.
You and I talked about this once before. Connections are really important. Networking is really important. And, the years that I had spent up until I lost that job, I made a lot of connections. And I reached out to those people. And somebody knew somebody who knew somebody that was looking for somebody to produce a classic rock radio show at VH1.
Okay.
Radio show. Called me. Would you be interested? I was like,
Oh, let me think about that for a minute.
duh. And I'm sure I share this with a lot of people. Like, I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm not sure if I'm good enough to do that. And I was like, what are you talking? Just go for the interview, find out what it is, and, do it. Ended up getting the job. And it was just an awesome job.
And that's often something that is attributed more to women than men, that they'll tend to maybe underestimate themselves
Yep.
a little bit, be a little more hesitant. Some people say fake it till you make it. And it's not necessarily faking it, but just maybe fake the level of confidence, right?
Absolutely.
And just go in there and have cheerleaders in your life. Yeah. Who aren't going to be the first ones to say, oh, are you sure about that? Do you know what's
Confidence.
involved?
Confidence is really key. And I was even finding myself saying, do I want to commute into New York again? I really don't want this job, do I?
Yeah.
Then when I got offered the job, it was like, yeah, I do want this job.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, don't underestimate yourself ever.
And as this is a show for women, particularly at midlife and beyond, let's talk about some of your experiences being a woman in what I believe to be a predominantly male environment, especially with rock.
Yes.
Right? So what were some of your experiences?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that the majority of people that I worked for, either men or women, were okay in terms of anything to do with discrimination in that form. I did find myself in a situation during that period when I was in between jobs. I was working a bunch of different things, and there was an afternoon drive position open at this radio station, and I was part-time there, and the guy in charge said to me, no, I really need a guy in the afternoon. And I was like, all right, well, then I don't want to work here.
Right.
Because I was more than qualified. I had the ratings to show it. I had the experience to show it. So, yeah, that happens. There were a couple of other incidents that happened over the time that, I was there. But my time at PLR, which is a big rock station, I was there almost 20 years, and I was really the only female full-timer.
Okay.
There were a couple of part-timers that kind of came in and went. So I did find myself surrounded by majority of men. And rock is traditionally a male,
That's how I think of it.
type of music. It
Yeah.
attracts more men. Interestingly, when I did my show there, the ratings would come back, and it was pretty much equally men and women.
Yeah.
So that sort of proved my point that, hey, hi, I listen to rock radio. I've always
Yeah.
listened to rock
Yeah.
radio.
Right.
But it's out there in the business, especially when it's dominated by.
Right. Traditionally, as you say, kind of the male environment.
Well, and even to the point where, and again, not so much now, thank goodness, but it was kind of unheard of to have two women in shifts back to back on the air.
Okay.
So, in other words, if you had a guy in the morning, you couldn't have if you had a girl in the midday, you couldn't have a girl in the afternoon.
Okay.
You could have a guy back to back but I know. It was
Right.
like, who decided that?
Okay.
And even farther back than that, you couldn't play, and this was before my time. I never experienced this. My husband did. You could not play two female artists back to back.
So that was a whole separate set of rules that could compete with the bureaucracy of these are the only music, titles you can play now.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
a more informally based set of rules as opposed to research.
Where that came from,
Right.
I have no idea. Maybe somebody did some sort of research that
Yeah.
said, oh, well, we can't have two female, you can't play the Supremes and the Marvelettes or, Carly Simon, and well, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some could be.
So that, fortunately, is not, as far as I know, it's not the case anymore. It's not my experience.
Okay, great. Well, progress.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know,
It's great to
Kicking
live
and
through
screaming.
it and to see it and be part of it.
for sure.
Now, you MC at a lot of fundraisers. You have a presence in different community activities. A lot of them are focusing on animals.
Yeah, that's my
So how did that?
pet.
That's your pet
Project, yes.
Project. Yeah. How's that meaningful for you?
One of the really nice things about radio, and I'm sure that TV people would say this too, is you get asked to do stuff, fundraisers, and
Okay.
it's really nice. I mean, I'm honored if somebody says, hey, would you come and host my fundraiser for animal rescue? I'm like, yeah, of course I will.
Okay.
Because they figure that you're going to help get them some attention.
Sure.
But it's just nice to be asked, and it's nice to be in a position that you can do that,
Sure.
So animals are my big one because I love animals.
You have cats.
I have cats.
Cats. Okay.
But there's a lot of other things.
Okay.
I mean, cancer causes are near to me. I've done stuff with lupus, and
Okay.
it's
All right.
Alzheimer's.
No shortage of need.
If somebody asks and I can do it, I'll do it.
Wonderful.
And that's one of the really nice perks of being on radio. People ask you to do that stuff. And
That's great.
it's nice.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I'm happy if I can help.
Wonderful. And, women can be so key in helping each other, despite some of the earlier ideas of women in the workplace, the queen bee, and you don't want to have a woman boss if you're a woman, all that. That's, I don't know, again, who started all that. Who do you really think was your biggest, some of your key supporters, and how important is it to be a mentor to others?
In radio, we will have occasionally interns that come in, young kids that are looking to get into communications, radio, whatever it is. It's nice to have them come in. They watch what you do. They ask you questions. So that makes me happy to see younger people interested
Okay.
in keeping radio alive, because it's been a struggle. I mean, there are a lot of options now.
Sure.
Some kids don't even know what a radio is anymore, which is heartbreaking. But
But if
most
they
radio
can get
stations.
it through an app,
Most
does
radio
it really
stations,
matter?
they're on air,
Yeah.
they're online, they have
Yeah.
apps.
Right.
Meanwhile, Radio CT is a .com right now. We're not an AM/FM.
Okay.
That will probably be coming soon.
Okay, great.
You heard it here.
All right.
Yeah, I'm happy to share whatever I know with anybody that's interested. Brian and I have kids come in, college people come in sometimes and see what we're doing. They want to see what the studio is like. Come on in, you're welcome.
You say, come on in, and don't expect every studio to be like nice as that.
Exactly. You're getting spoiled. It's like getting box seats at
Yeah.
the baseball game.
There you go. So, thinking about being at midlife and beyond, what advice would you give yourself, younger selves, 25, 40, whatever periods you think of as pivotal?
Wow, that's a tough one. One of the questions that I've always disliked when you're involved in a job interview is, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Right.
Hopefully healthy and happy. Let's start with that. So much can change so quickly.
Sure.
To ask that question
Well, that's
is
an old. I
always
had 20 years in corporate, and there were career paths, and so in some functions, you could say, I would like to be the director
vice president
of
or-
versus,
yeah.
yeah,
yeah, that makes sense.
or pick up an auxiliary functional skill. Yeah,
Continue learning for sure. I mean
Yeah.
that's always a good thing. And continue to work. I've had people say to me, "Are you thinking of retiring?" And then I'm kind of like, well, first of all, I can use the money. And secondly, why?
Yeah, that's my take on it.
If I like/love what I'm doing, why not keep doing it?
Absolutely. We can do some of our best work as we age, I believe.
Exactly.
All the connections come together, the synapses, and
You and I spoke about that. You know, with age comes wisdom. You know, the more again, going back to your question about what would you tell your 25-year-old self, it's kind of what I was doing back then anyway, is make those connections and keep them. You know, talk, ask questions, be a sponge, find out. Everything you hear is not necessarily going to be accurate or
for you in particular,
exactly.
and your circumstance, perhaps.
Take it all in as much as you can. Weed through it. But, you know, there are people in my line of work that I looked up to when I decided that I wanted to try to make radio a career. Wonderful. And those people became friends. You know, I listened to them. I said, geez, and there are women. There are all women. And there weren't a lot of them in rock radio, but there were a couple, and we became friends, and I learned a lot just from listening to how they did it. And one of the keys to being decent on the radio is one-on-one. I'm talking to you, I'm not talking to
some vast,
the auditorium.
Faceless,
Hey, everybody. No, it's hey,
We're
Georgian.
all here together. Yeah. That's
you
great.
have to, you know, it's a friendly, warm, we're trying to keep it that way, medium.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I usually ask for a favorite quote, but I think you've kind of hit on it in terms of the advice and also just believing that wisdom and the connections, potential opportunities.
And things can happen when you least expect it sometimes, like getting into radio.
Be open to it.
When I had no intention of ever doing that.
All right.
Just for you, I found a quote.
Okay, great.
That I thought was apropos. So this quote I read, because I like to do research, was attributed to Oscar Wilde, although apparently that can't be substantiated. That he actually said it.
All right.
But for now, we'll say Oscar Wilde.
We'll go with it.
And the quote is, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken."
I love that quote. Perfect. Thank you.
Whether or not Oscar said it, who knows?
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Thank you so much. You were a terrific guest. I'm sure people learned a lot. And please tune in to hear other fascinating women on future episodes of Midlife Matters. Thank you for joining us.